take the floor at the end of the seminar to tell you more about the next seminar, but now it's time for me to leave the floor to the lead host of today's seminar, and I'm happy to introduce Katherine Russo. Is Associate Professor in English Language and Translation at the University of Naples L'Orientale. Among others, her research focuses on disability discourse studies, news and social media discourse, gender, post-colonial studies, climate change and climate-induced migration discourse. She has collaborated and published with leading scholars in the fields of critical discourse analysis and post-colonial studies, and she's the author of numerous articles, book chapters, edited volumes, and 3 monographs. And last but not least, Katherine Russo was my undergraduate dissertation supervisor. Thank you for accepting our invitation to host the seminar, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much for reminding me of that. That was a real pleasure, Francesco. I'm extremely happy to be here, and I would like, first of all, to thank Giuseppe Balirano and Francesco Nacchia for organizing today's seminar, and also Marina Nicefaro, who I believe played a part in the organization and is a valuable research staff member at L'Orientale. And yes, so thank you for organizing this. I believe it's a very challenging topic. Language and ecology may be interpreted maybe by lay people as a nexus or a topic, but experts in the field know that this is an extremely difficult task to define, as it is being interpreted as an approach, as a field, and as a discipline, and was perhaps the first studies appeared in the 1970s, and the discipline has been renamed several times as, for instance, language ecology, ecolinguistics more recently. But indeed, it's very difficult to delimit its scopes and aims that have changed considerably. Just by way of, and I believe the 4 speakers will give us their ideas. I will ask them to introduce their research and tell us about how they interpret this nexus in their research. But I just would like to say that there are at least 3 or 4 strands in ecolinguistics, language and ecology, or ecolinguistics. One is related to language as a symbolic ecology and the coexistence of different languages within ecologies, language ecologies, and indeed, so giving, the discussion has been about language endangerment, the coexistence of languages, obviously the dominant languages, as you want, in a metaphorical way, also linked to biodiversity, and so on. And indeed, I believe I-LanD is in a great position to be saying a lot about this, because it's related to diversity, language diversity. Also that another strand is that language exists in a natural ecology, and so the relationship between language and ecosystemic surroundings, how these ecosystemic surroundings like topography, climate, and so on influence language. And indeed, another line of research could be that of raising awareness about ideology, an ecological ideology in texts, and also within grammar. I mean, Halliday posited not only, called researchers' attention not only to the representation in text, but also to these power relations between nature and humans within languages, grammars and languages. But today we have the so-called critical turn, if you want, and many scholars have been dealing with critical discourse analysis and views of how the environment is represented, climate change, and so on. And last but not least, cognitive ecology. So how language is enabled by the dynamics between biological organisms. And so a lot of challenges. And recently, Alastair Pennycook, if you're interested in applied linguistics, has, I believe, published a very interesting book, Posthumanist Applied Linguistics, which is a bit difficult to digest, perhaps, but very interesting. So it does, is a posthumanist applied linguistics possible? And so we have a lot of very difficult questions that we might try to answer through this language and ecology nexus. And I don't want to steal more time from our speakers, because I believe they can all tell us a lot about this and have all really contributed to the field in different ways. So our first speaker is Maria Bortoluzzi, Associate Professor of English Language in the Department of Languages, Literatures, Communication, Education and Society at the University of Udine, Italy. Her research interests are in the areas of critical discourse studies, ecolinguistics, multimodality, and multiliteracy for language teacher education. She has been working in the field of ecolinguistics for quite a long time, and she's anyway, she will tell us more about her work, but I would just like to mention a couple of publications. For instance, recently, Storytelling with Children in Informal Contexts, Learning to Narrate Across the Offline-Online Boundaries. And she's been working on literacy, ecology literacy, and also environmental crisis and pandemic emergencies, news stories of erasures and awareness. So I give you the floor, Maria, and it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me at this seminar. Thank you for organizing the seminar. Thank you, Katherine, for your kind presentation. And thank you to the organizers, Giuseppe, Francesco, and all the people who work for this. I will just briefly contextualize, try to contextualize ecolinguistic studies and realizing how complex they are, but and then I will mention two strands of my own work. As Katherine mentioned Halliday, and I would like to quote one of his famous publications. He said that he wrote that our reality, in quotes, is not something ready-made or waiting to be meant. It has to be actively construed. And language evolved in the process of and as the agency of its construal. And from this tenet, a strand of ecolinguistic derives, and I quote Stibbe in defining one of the strands. Ecolinguistics focuses on the literal ecosystems which life depends on and examines the role of language within these ecosystems. And he also writes that the link between ecology and language is that how humans treat each other and the natural world is influenced by our thoughts, concepts, ideas, ideologies, and worldviews, and these in turn are shaped through language. So the complexity Katherine was speaking about before. And Laker, from a cognitive point of view, mentions that the environment frame views the environment as separate from and around us. Yet we are not separate from nature, and I keep on quoting Laker. We are inseparable part of nature, yet we separate self from other and conceptualize nature as other. And over 24 years ago, Alwyn Phil, one of the founding scholars of ecolinguistics, proposed, and he's still actively proposing, the use of the term convironment to underline the fact that self is nature. as Stephenson and Phil write, language is not just about nature, but is of nature. And from this very wide point of departure, I would like first to mention some aspect of my recent ongoing research work, which is about the representation of plants. And secondly, I will briefly mention some ecolinguistics and ecoliteracy initiatives involving our university students, and on which part of it we do some research. Plant representation. Scientists, botanists tell us that plant life includes the overwhelming majority of the living mass on our planet. And human and non-human animal life would not exist without plants, whereas most plants could still exist or adapt to a life without animals. However, we tend to suffer from what is known as plant blindness. We humans belonging to the affluent and industrialized and digitalized world are detached from plants. And we tend to consider them either as things we eat or the backdrop of places in which we live. And we tend to see them as passive or almost inanimate, and think, as an example, of the figurative meaning of the verb vegetate, which means the figurative meaning means leading a passive life, which is exactly the opposite of its literal meaning, which means to sprout, to be very alive. There are wide-ranging studies about plants, of course, in many disciplines, botany, ethnology, anthropology, literature studies, with one development of critical plant studies, and many other research fields. In ecolinguistics, while research about non-human animals constitutes a relevant subfield, studies about plants seem to be underrepresented. So I tried to address some aspects of the following research questions. How are plants represented in discourse in connection with the environment they belong to and contribute to creating? And how are plants represented in relation to humans and other animals? I started by investigating texts that recognize the value of plants and ecosystems and promote environmental protection to address the climate crisis. For example, reports or summaries of reports by the United Nations and UNESCO. These reports are part of institutional discourse that inform policy making and agenda setting at global and local level and educational level. The main purpose of these texts is taking action against the deterioration of ecosystems and positively promoting their protection, often through plants. Interestingly, the analysis shows that even in these texts, plants are mostly represented as passive resources related to human needs and framed as means to repair ecosystems damaged by humans. Thus, there seems to be a disalignment, Alwyn Phil would say a tension, between the overwhelming relevance of plants per se on the planet and their representation as means to repair the effects of human-inflicted climate crisis. What I found particularly interesting during the analysis is the need for adapting the discursive frameworks to plant representation. Plant life and communities are very different from animal life. I noticed that some discursive categories tend to be defined in zoocentric terms as well as anthropocentric terms. The instantiation in discourse of genetic specific, individual, collective, representation of actions through processes, animacy, and the huge complex area of agency, time frames, among other variables, need to be reassessed and used and applied more flexibly. As Capra writes, Fritjof Capra, because living systems are non-linear and rooted in patterns of relationships, understanding the principles of ecology requires a new way of seeing the world and of thinking in terms of relationships, connectedness, and context. And I finish looking at some of actions we take together with the students. Ecoliteracy is a way of promoting insights into this complexity Capra mentions, and identifying some educational paths to move forward together with our students. I quote Goldman, Burnett, and Barlow to define ecoliteracy as vital practices that integrate emotional, social, and ecological intelligence in order to strengthen and extend our capacity to live sustainably. We involve students in our courses in different ways to take actions through communication and collaboration as part of their coursework assessment or at voluntary level. And the postgraduate modern language degrees, students are involved in creating campaigns for awareness raising and action taking for different target groups of young adults. And in the postgraduate degree course of education, Scienze della Formazione, education for nursery and primary teacher education, students can participate as volunteer storytellers in a project run by Elisa Bertolli, a PhD candidate, and me. And the project is called TALES. And the acronym is Telling and Listening to Eco-Sustainable Stories. English as an additional language is used as medium to involve groups of children in local libraries and the local Natural History Museum in storytelling events around the picture book, which focus on how we belong to nature and we have to respect nature. So university students involve children in exploring together with us an alternative, respectful, and more sustainable life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, and also for giving us so many things to think about. No, also that, as I was saying, it's not just about the representation of nature. No, it's about reshaping our ideas about language. No, and in relationship with nature, and so on. I would like now to introduce our second speaker, and we'll leave questions after our speakers in first round of. So Scott Burnett is an assistant professor of communication at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden and an affiliate researcher at the University of Witwatersrand Center for Diversity Studies in South Africa. Also, his research investigates the relationship between the reproduction of race-gender hierarchies in discourses of land control and ownership in environmentalist campaigns, but also far-right and anti-feminist discourses in online communities. So his research is widely published and has been published in top international journals in the fields of critical discourse studies, men and masculinities, sexualities, patterns of prejudice, and environment and planning. So I give you the floor, Scott, and a welcome, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Katherine. Can you hear me? Am I?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I'm using a different microphone. I will take it as granted and given that we know that the climate crisis, the environmental crisis is worsening, it's deepening, and that one of the biggest questions that we have to answer as academics and as people is who is going to do something about it, or what to do about it. So questions of agency, questions of responsibility are absolutely central. I'm interested in my research how we construct agency and power in talking about the environmental horrors that surround us when we verbalize or textualize the positions we take. A number of dynamics that I want to discuss today are at play here. So the first emerges between whether we represent subjects as being universal or particular. Take, for example, the Anthropocene. This is the idea that human activity has had such a profound effect on the planet that it has created a new geological epoch. Indeed, establishing in the public's mind the fact that climate change is anthropogenic has for a long time been an important objective of environmental politics. And yet, this anthropos hides too much. It is not people in general, but the owners of the means of capitalist production that have poisoned rivers, raised forests, and pushed billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Scholars, including Andreas Malm, Donna Haraway, and Jason Moore, have proposed capitalocene instead of Anthropocene as a term that better focuses our attention on the actual causes of harm to the planet. We could even go along with a more specific term as recently proposed by Nicholas Mirzoeff, which was the white supremacy scene instead of the Anthropocene. While human cultures have impacted on their environments historically, in some cases causing waves of extinction and deforestation, the sheer scale and impact of the current global crisis cannot be blamed on humanity in general. We must focus on those individuals and nations that have grown immeasurably wealthy off the spoils of environmental devastation. To be more specific, today's OECD countries, where white Western European nations and their former colonies and other colonial powers dominate. In many cases, this wealth has been socialized so that any citizen of Sweden or Italy or Australia reaps a considerable benefit today from the historical crimes of genocide, despoliation, and plunder. The balance of power in modernity is inseparable from the imbricated globalizing phenomena of the slave trade, settler colonialism, and capitalism. It's for this reason that the philosopher Olufemi Taiwo has recently argued that climate crisis and class domination, cis-heteropatriarchy, and racism together provide more than adequate grounds for a moment of reckoning, a massive global transfer of power and money from haves to have-nots in the form of reparations, which increasingly are understood as climate reparations. Because slavery and colonialism persist in diverse forms of racial capitalism that lie at the heart of the climate crisis, a future that represents a decisive break with the present can only be built if we have an understanding of our predicament that is both appropriately historicized and systemic. Which brings me to another dynamic around agency, which is the perennial tension between structure and agency. So much of what passes for green discourse in Western contexts is a deranged voluntarism, where an individual consumer is appealed to as responsible for saving the planet through making ethical, environmentally sustainable purchasing decisions. But we cannot consume our way out of a crisis caused by consumerism. Societies that place high value on freedom to choose tend to favor narratives about themselves that mask the extent to which choice is in fact highly constrained, nudged in the most profitable direction by a system that is hegemonic. As Matt Huber has correctly pointed out, this ideological sleight of hand distributes the responsibility for doing something about the crisis across billions of consumers worldwide, rather than focusing it on where the actual center of power lies, the very few number of people who actually profit from the system. Though this arrangement is fundamentally anti-democratic, as Nancy Fraser has recently argued, it is managed to make the protection of the property rights of these few people paramount. In this way of thinking, focused popular power and decision-making that is socialized is what is oppressive. So giving the people too much power to control markets, to stop consumption, etc., that is oppression, whereas freedom is letting the system just carry on as usual. The third dynamic I want to speak to relates to how we think about personhood in relation to the natural world. While post-humanism and new materialism may be integral parts of a radical environmentalist vision, I want to focus here on a tendency to grant charismatic animals membership of a national community or attribute legal personhood to a river and then proceed to speak on behalf of those animals, that river or that landscape. Making animals or rivers or landscapes more like people might seem to be a good way to reconcile humans to our connectedness to the web of life. But these discursive moves can never be separated from the material conditions and relations of power that enabled them in the first place. So, for example, the personhood of the Whanganui River in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is connected to legal recognition of its connection to a local Maori iwi. When Maori people in Aotearoa are still facing racist treatment by the settler population, they're still fighting for their rights, there's no guarantee that just being a person gets you away from any kind of damage, right? So it comes down to people and politics at the end of the day. As I've shown in my research on poaching in Southern Africa, much of the cultural work that we do in order to center the endangered rhinoceros as dear to the nation's heart, in South Africa especially, works to cheapen Black life, ultimately legitimizing the extrajudicial executions of impoverished hunters at sites of ecotourism and conservation production. Nature is unfortunately unable to make its own case through communicative acts. And so those who claim to speak for nature are no less entangled in the net of power relations and inequalities than are any one of us. As the Potawatomi environmental scholar Kyle White has argued, people who claim to want to mend relationships with nature very seldom understand that these relationships subsist on our relationships with each other. These three dynamics, in thinking about our complicity or responsibility in relation to the climate crisis, are one of the reasons I think that we need as much critical attention to the discourses of environmentalism as we do to the discourses of racism, neoliberalism, capitalism, patriarchy. I would thus argue against a recent suggestion by Aaron Stiver in the 2017 Ecolinguistics Handbook that ecolinguistics should start from an assumption that so-called negative discourses are the ones that are about exploiting the earth, and that positive discourses are those that show respect for nature, and that our role as discourse analysts is to expose the negative and to celebrate and be encouraged by the latter. Since its very inception, environmentalism has faced capture by the very elite forces that destroy the natural world in the first place. And rather than representing a clash between environmental destruction and environmental respect, much environmentalism has served as little more than an unstable détente between the two that has worked to serve the interests of the powerful. If we look at a few topics that might arise within a discourse analytical context, we can think of the trope of barbarian hordes in overpopulation discourse. So if you listen to someone like David Attenborough, he will tell you that humanity is a plague on the earth, and here he universalizes to all people. We have the demonization of populations in Asia and in Africa that are having too many children, that are largely grounded in racist assumptions about, what exactly is harming the earth, while the patterns of consumption, both current and historical, actually point to the burden on the earth of population as being much more focused to the people whose birth rates are now actually much lower. So a lot of the panic around overpopulation is really built on a racist form of Malthusianism. Another I've already alluded to is the low-scale war raging in protected areas across the world over the conservation of elephants, rhinos, and other charismatic fauna. A form of militarized conservation and green violence around the world is a phenomenon today, but it's actually been around since the start of conservation areas in the 19th century. A lot of the things that we think of as being the most important achievements of conservation were in fact built on the back of dispossession, eviction from lands, and herding indigenous people into reservations. There are a couple of other tropes that I was going to touch on, but I've run out of time. So I hope we can discuss them later on here, or maybe in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Scott. And there's a lot to think about also in your brief tale about what you're doing, but also I think very interesting concepts about also the strand in research about capitalism and so on. And I think a lot of us can relate to that strand as well. And also, for instance, recently, I was thinking about the scary eco-fascists, capitalizing on, COVID and so on. And a new term is virusing. Anyway, I will maybe talk about this later. Okay, now we have our third speaker, Arianna Del Gaudio, who is a PhD student in English Language and Translation Studies at the Department of Literary, Linguistic and Comparative Studies at the University of Naples L'Orientale. She is studying climate change and corporate discourse studies, and she's carrying out her research by focusing on corporate discourses on sustainability and climate change. And her research is funded by PON and these funds, and so she's working also in collaboration with a firm called Carbon Sink, which works on decarbonization. And so I leave you the floor, Arianna.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Professor Russo, for introducing me. And I would also like to thank the I-LanD Research Center for organizing this second series of seminars, and Professor Balirano and Francesco Nacchia for inviting me here today. So as I'm the third speaker, I will try not to repeat some things that Scott Burnett and Maria Bortoluzzi have already said. So going straight to the point, my research draws on findings obtained by the combination of quantitative corpus linguistic tools and methods with qualitative discourse analytical techniques to analyze corporate discourses on climate change and environmental sustainability. And in particular, I'm looking at these issues from a qualitative point of view through the appraisal framework and the discourse analytical approach, in order to contribute to a better understanding of the role of language in performing ideologies, values, and ideas. So regarding language and ecology, as this is the theme of the panel, I would say that this relationship in my research is a little bit different. I mean, it doesn't deal with the role of language on the environment at the biological or ecological level. I mean, it's not in terms of the sustainability of languages, but it is based on how climate change and how the environmental issues are portrayed in corporate discourses. So corporate discourses specifically on environmental sustainability are worth my attention, because the industry sector is nowadays positioned among the key contributors to the degradation of our planet, and nowadays companies are actually aware of this. But
I can't hear you, Arianna. Can the others hear her?
No, I think we lost her.
Okay. That's a shame. Maybe I can.
I'm not sure I've got her number. Maybe we can contact her some way.
Yes, I have a number, but maybe we can move the conversation forward. And then go back to Arianna?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next.
Actually, she's back, I think. I can see her anyway.
No.
No, I can see a black screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Me too. Yeah, let's move on to the next speaker. Yeah.
Okay, so our next speaker is Daniela Francesca Virdis, and from Cagliari, yes, sorry. Her PhD is from the University of Genoa, and she's associate professor at the University in English Language and Translation at the University of Cagliari, where she teaches different courses on language and gender, stylistics, pragmatics, and structural grammar. She's a member of the International Ecolinguistics Association Steering Group and the Erasmus Program Academic Coordinator for the Faculty of Humanities of the University of Cagliari. She has published widely on ecological stylistics, which is another very interesting strand in the research. For instance, the book Ecological Stylistics, Eco-Stylistic Approaches to Discourses of Nature, the Environment and Sustainability. And another book, she's the co-editor of the book Language in Place, Stylistic Perspectives on Landscape, Place and Environment, and the Stylistics of Landscapes, the Landscapes of Stylistics. And another one of her interests is in gender, so she's published a serialized gender, a linguistic analysis of femininities in contemporary TV series and media, which won the Aya Book Prize 2013. Thank you so much for being here, Daniela. I'm really happy also to meet you, although here, and so please tell us about how this language and how you interpret language and ecology in your research.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. So thank you for your very kind introduction and for having me here today. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you, our colleagues and the audience, and to have the chance to discuss my research interests in this challenging and fascinating field as language and ecology is. So my research on the topic deals with, or can be ideally divided into three main strands of research, and with the related text types and the related methodologies. So the first is language and ecology, with ecology literally meant. So as was mentioned before by some of the previous speakers, the so-called Hallidayan tradition. So the second strand of research is on language and animals, and the third is on language and landscape and natural scenery literally meant once more. So Catherine kindly mentioned ecological stylistics, which is a recent book-length study, and it investigates one main text type, so namely the websites of environmental organizations and agencies, but its theoretical framework also draws from, the ecology and environmental textbooks and dictionaries to have a look at the keywords investigated in the book and then identified in, let's say, authentic texts. And in particular, here I investigated 5 keywords, namely nature, environment, ecosystem, ecology, and sustainability. And the whole volume had a main research purpose, which is to identify beneficial discourses and to investigate the beneficial eco-stylistic strategies utilized to produce those discourses. I hear an echo, but perhaps that's just me. No, it's gone. Okay, good. So beneficial discourses and beneficial strategies. Why am I emphasizing this? Beneficial is a technical term coined by Aaron Stibbe to talk about beneficial discourses versus ambivalent discourses versus, in turn, destructive discourses. And this strand of research and this interest in particular derives from positive discourse analysis. So enough with looking for destructive models, criticizing destructive models, but trying to identify positive models, in particular positive relations and models of relations between the human world and the non-human world. And why eco-stylistics and not eco-linguistics? It's again a methodological issue. As the audience probably knows, mainstream ecolinguistics, or the ecolinguistics as meant by STIBI and the International Ecolinguistics Association, is mainly based on discourse analysis. While my methodology is slightly different because it is founded on stylistics. So my methods are such classical, let's say, stylistic methods as foregrounding, point of view, and metaphor, but as meant and investigated in stylistics. So yes, I have tried to apply eco-stylistics to present-day discourses about ecological issues and the environmental crisis. And yes, stylistics is a great discipline, but probably little has been done so far to try to engage in environmentalism and ecological issues. So two co-edited volumes mentioned by Katherine in her introduction are Language in Place and the Stylistics of Landscapes, the Landscapes of Stylistics. And the first, Language in Place, was co-edited with Elisabetta Azzurro and Ernestine Leahy. And we were lucky enough to have many contributors from different fields. So we had investigations of literary and non-literary discourses and a variety of text types, ranging from poetry, the Bible, fictional and non-fictional prose, to newspaper articles, condo names, online texts, and exhibitions. All of them with dealing with directly or indirectly with ecological issues. So with regard to methodology, we had both established and cutting-edge methodologies, so corpus linguistics, metaphor studies, text word theory, and eco-stylistics. Then, in the other edited volume, this time co-edited with John Douthwaite and Elisabetta Azzurro, the Stylistics of Landscapes, it's mainly a literary study, or a study of literary texts, but of non-canonical literary texts, ranging from lesser-known texts in English to significant works in languages other than English. So here the focus is on physical landscapes, but also on the idea of landscape as a social and cultural metaphor. And the majority of the chapters have a cognitive basis, so either cognitive linguistics or cognitive stylistics and poetics. And a wide range of methodologies is, in any case, teamed up with close reading, which is typical of stylistics. At the beginning, I mentioned three main strands in my research, and this also deals with, this is an article, I'd like to talk about an article dealing with the language and ecology nexus. It investigates metaphor and framing as strategies in John Ruskin's The Storm Cloud of the 19th Century. So here the text type is academic lectures, and it was widely recognized by scholars and critics as the first text, so dating back to the 1880s, the first text explicitly dealing with the ecological crisis. And I investigated metaphors and frames, the metaphors and frames triggered by the two title words, so storm and cloud. And these metaphors are beneficial, so back to the idea of a beneficial strategy and a beneficial discourse. So beneficial strategies urging us humans to preserve the ecological structures all living beings rely on. And still about methodology, because it's quite important, I think, in this seminar, but in any seminar or academic event, to be clear about methodology and how we use methodologies and apply them. I have compared all of my data with the metaphors and frames cataloged in three databases, including cataloging metaphors and frames. So master metaphor list, Metalude, developed by George Lakoff, Metalude, developed by Andrew Goatley, and MetaNet Metaphor Wiki, based on the first I mentioned, so master metaphor list, and again belonging to, let's say, George Lakoff's circle. Then another article whose, let's say, ecological merit goes to my co-author, because I wrote it together with a colleague and a friend, Gabriella Milia. It's about the sustainability and teaching. So its main topic is the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goal number 13, climate action. So my co-author, Gabriella, is a teacher, a school teacher, and she has used several written and oral authentic texts to build a lesson plan at the B2 level, developing the 4 linguistic skills. So here the topic of the ecological crisis is treated by means of English language teaching, which is, you know, relatively new and absolutely topical as an approach because it belongs to the wider field of TESOL and sustainability. Then, moving on to the second strand of my research that's related to ecology, well, language, ecology, and animals. I wrote 2 articles about this, both of them based on the Hallidayan functional grammar. And I analyzed 2 different texts in the 2 different articles, and I classified all of the processes performed by the animals in them into the 6 Hallidayan process types. So the first article and the first text, well, the first text is the website of an English charity rehoming dogs and cats. And here I also tried to define alternative discourse, so beneficial discourse as referred to animals, and the concept and notion of agency, which was mentioned a couple of times, which has been mentioned a couple of times today. So agency in human-animal studies on the one hand, and functional grammar on the other hand. And the language used by the website authors constructs an environmentally conscious alternative discourse, so a beneficial one, instilling respect for the cats as agentive beings. So that's probably the key strategy used in the on the website. Then the second article deals with the novella Jonathan Livingstone Seagull. And again, the wider theoretical framework is human-animal studies and Hallidayan functional grammar. So the author anthropomorphizes and hybridizes animals, in particular seagulls. So typically human behavior patterns and way of thinking are projected onto the seagulls. And why is this a problem? Because animals are not recognized as independent beings, but are reduced to human norms and patterns. So we don't appreciate them as animals, but as, let's say, because they mirror as people. Now, Katherine, do I have time to quickly deal with my third research strand?
Yes, just a few minutes. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. So, very quickly, because I realize we're running out of time, or I have run out of time. So, language and landscape and natural scenery. So here, let's say the activist or militant aim of the research is kind of hidden. But when you deal with landscapes, when you deal with natural scenery, and when you deal with human interactions with them, well, the problems are nearly the same. The texts here, or the text here, doesn't bring them to the fore, but in an explicit way, in an activist or militant way, as I said before, but they are there. So I analyzed an erotic novel and the landscapes depicted in the novel by the main character and first-person narrator. So there are several stylistic strategies utilized to depict both landscapes and masculinity. So stylistic choices at word and phrase level, collocation and compounding, and so on and so forth. So the unfolding of the erotic narrative develops from the description of the landscape as feminized and sexualized. Then I have also applied a sociological model of gender masculinity characterized by land ownership and domination of the physical environment. Again, you have human domination of the landscape, which mirrors the male domination of women. And yes, another important point here is feminist cultural geography when it comes to methodology. But yes, again, the strategy of feminizing and sexualizing the landscape in order for masculinities to dominate it. And yes, but I think I can stop here because I have also analyzed a couple more texts, but yes.
Maybe we can come to it later because
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
all
so
right.
because these seminars usually have more of a, it's more about, the questions and so, let's hope to have a bit of space for questions. So,
all right, thank you.
But thank you very much. Allora, Arianna, let's go back to Arianna, who was telling us about her research.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the inconvenience, and I cannot remember where I was before getting lost, but I suppose I was talking about the relationship between language and ecology in my research. So I interpret this relationship in terms of how how companies talk about climate change and how they represent both the environment and environmental issues. And through practices of disclosures, basically, companies still have the opportunity to increase their legitimacy, but also they can shape significant social and political response and consensus to the problem. And that's maybe the reason why I think that these discourses require critical analysis. What I'm actually doing in my research is analyzing data in the from the agribusiness sector, which has been acknowledged as responsible for more than 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it is also a very highly vulnerable sector to the local and global climate shocks, as it impacts raw materials both on sourcing and productions. And as you probably know, corporate discourses for external communication in particular do not merely transfer results or factual information. So it's not about just number, tables, and so on, but they contribute to the creation of the corporate identity. And more recently, through the use of social media in particular, companies started to encourage the interaction with stakeholders, lay people, communities, also in order to reach insights into the general public opinion on the problem, especially in this time of crisis where it seems crucial to achieve carbon neutrality in order to ensure the survival of future generation and the survival of the planet. So in the last decades, corporate environmental communication contributed to establishing a new genre, which is actually non-mandatory for companies. And for this reason, it has maybe less standardized conventions, even though nowadays we have some non-profit organizations that are providing standards in order to uniform the communication. And in order to give you an idea of where my research is going, this is an ongoing research. Well, I'm looking at, as I was saying before, at climate change and environmental sustainability in communication in web pages about sustainability, in environmental report or CSR reports in general. And I will look at also social media platform, in particular Twitter, because I'd like to understand how they talk about these issues with a limited number of characters or by using hashtags, for instance. And my aim is to examine the perception of climate change. So if it is considered, for instance, as a responsibility or a threat or yet an opportunity for further growth. And in particular, I think that is particularly related with Halliday's theory on growthism and anthropocentrism, which considers the economic growth as the ultimate goal, even in times of severe environmental decline. Moreover, I'm also focusing on how companies represent specific social actors, including stakeholders, communities, and the environment itself. For instance, if the environment is represented as a stakeholder, or if we have a passivization of it. And actually, in doing so, usually corporations try to guide the general audience to believe that they actively engage in climate change mitigation. So by combining qualitative and quantitative research methods, I'm trying to unveil corporate ideologies and reflect upon some of them, such as the importance of adopting international climate agreements, the importance of accompanying economic growth, but also the importance of protecting the environment. So how companies, if and how companies care for the planet. And as you know, this is quite central to the debate around sustainability, language, and ecology. So moreover, in carrying out my analysis, I'm also interested in examining how discourse changes over time and according to the use of different genres or different digital platforms, but also according to geographical and cultural contexts. So to conclude, what I can state at the moment is, for sure, there is a growing interest in communicating the need to reduce negative environmental impacts and take action to find solutions to climate change. And this is maybe related to what Professor Russo was saying at the beginning, so raise awareness on these topics. But also my challenge is also to better understand if in corporate environmental communication, climate actions, missions, and strategies appear as a background to improve the self-image of a corporation. So if the company survival, the company growth is still a priority compared to the environmental survival. And if so, in terms of social impact, I think that my aim is to find a way to support companies to shift the emphasis from a corporate marketing-centered communication to a real interest for the environment and to reach environmental sustainability. Thank you, and I'm sorry again for what happened before.
So much. Thank you so much. That's also an ambitious goal, Arianna. But I think your study is extremely interesting in the way that you look critically at corporate discourse, and also there are some connections with the previous speakers in what they said about agency responsibility. And today we can think critically about many terms and catchwords that are substituting perhaps development, like resilience and so on. But I want to leave the floor to our audience, and I can see that there are a lot of really great scholars that have experts, but also students can also ask questions. I can see that there are also experts in the field that have joined us, so I'm really happy about that. Yes, I can see already a question. Chiara. Hi, Chiara.
Yes.
Yes. Hello, Chiara.
You hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Good evening.
Yes. Hello. Hello. Can I ask also maybe
hello.
Maria and Daniela to maybe switch their cameras on so that thank you. Okay, Chiara.
Okay,
is a PhD student at L'Orientale.
Yes, I am a PhD student at L'Orientale in linguistics and precisely stylistics and pragmatics. And well, I have a question for Scott Burnett. if that's possible.
Okay.
And well, I was so very interested in your discourse about agency and power. I'm quite a layman about environmental studies and ecostatistics, but talking about person, you have a tendency to guarantee charismatic animals membership. And I was wondering who has the chance to decide about the personhood of these animals if it is our more and more hegemonic system. That's all. Thank you.
Scott, did you get that? Because
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you, and thank you so much, Chiara, for that question. The tendency that I'm responding to there is not necessarily the idea that some form of legal personhood might not be a good strategy for an environmental movement to pursue, and certainly indigenous environmental organizations around the world have been doing that kind of work. My concern is that, you know, we are always in trying to get the animals and the landscapes, etc., to talk to us. We are always in some way talking for them, right? We are involving them in discourse by describing, you know, the way that they fit into our cultural lives, by projecting national identity onto landscapes, for example, by seeing our history in the fields. There are so many different ways in which we do that. In the conservation context, charismatic animals have been a major way that people have kind of connected to conservation. So deciding, for example, that the rhinoceros is a kind of a symbol of you know, South African wildlife and of something to be protected, as opposed to, say, an endangered flower or a type of cactus or something like that, is a way that people try to kind of assert their care. It's like a kind of sentimental positioning of self as being on the good side of history. You know, I am for conservation. I am against poaching. You know, I am against the destruction of nature. I am for the protection of these wonderful animals. I love them. They love me. Like, there's really kind of intimate kind of language that develops between animals and people there. And so what I'm interested in is then the way that that turns into justifications for continued inequality, for exposure to premature death of people along the borders of areas where rhinos are. You can be shot if you are, you know, you don't even necessarily have to have a gun in your hands. But, you know, if you look threatening around the rhinos, they can shoot you. So the rhino is more of a citizen than you are. Because we've made them into these symbols of everything that's good about us, as opposed to getting very critical about why they need conservation in the first place, and what system has produced that. And yeah, I would argue that it's essentially the same system. It's the system of racial capitalism, and the very, very same structure is now what keeps conservation going. It's what keeps ecotourism going in South Africa. If you look at the way that those economies work, they are racial capitalist economies.
Yeah. Yes, I think, okay, there's a new question. Yes, anyway, I think
Thank
maybe also Maria and Daniela could say something, because they were thinking, I think, about also ways in which you know, critically language somehow is this aligned with you know, and speciesism, and you know how somehow it's a very anthropocentric way of looking at you know, we still have this also in movements in some literature, as Daniela was saying, and so on. But there's a question from Anna Mongibello.
Yeah, hello. Thank you everybody for your talks. They were very fascinating. I'm not an expert, of course, so I'm just, and I'm sorry, I missed the first part of this of the seminar because I was getting back home. But I was just rethinking maybe while you were speaking about the way we conceive the environment is very much embedded in our language, and I think it determines the way we relate to the landscape, our own relationship with the landscape. And this involves also the use, I believe, of metaphors. Daniela mentioned how human domination of landscape equates male domination over the female body. And that is very fascinating. I was also thinking to colonial occupation, to the way the landscape was represented, using the trope of terra nullius, or the virgin land, and how traces of this representation, colonial representation of the landscape, are still visible in some of the names, in some place names. For example, Newfoundland in Canada still maintains, saves the traces of this representation of the virgin land, Newfoundland, but found by whom? I mean, it was already found by the indigenous peoples of Canada, of course. So I don't know if you want to say something more about this relationship between metaphors, language, colonial occupation, maybe the way we conceive the language environment through language. I'm just leaving it out there. I know it's a very generic comment, but I don't know, maybe it could keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I don't know if maybe Daniela and Maria and maybe also Scott want to answer this.
I'd be glad to, but
yes,
if Scott and Maria would like to say something before I do. Oh, okay, all right. Well, actually, yes. Thank you for your question, because, it's very challenging. And actually, one of the two articles I didn't have the time to talk about, in particular, the very first I wrote about the topic, analyzes a colonial text. And it's a text by Trevelyan. Well, it's an analysis of a text drawn from a wider book written by Trevelyan, and the title of the book is The Competition Walla. And there's a part which describes an Indian railway. So a landscape with railways and railway infrastructure built, tiredness is kicking in. Yes, built by the British in colonial India. And actually the text is a set of fictionalized letters home from India, written by a fictional character. And there you have, no surprises here, the enthusiastic, romantic, and positive value-laden remarks of the author about the British railway facility and the infrastructure in India, and all the rest, so anything Indian, is depicted as desolate and desperate and backward and, an annoying colonial text, to cut a long story short. And the natural scenery is described in minute detail, and all of its features are functional to the colonial ideology communicated by the British author. So again, anything British is wonderful and worthy of praise. Anything India is worthy of colonization. So we're the good ones, yes, doing something good for humanity. And moving back instead to the topic of, yes, the, let's say, landscape woman nexus. Yes, it emerges in a clear way when the sociological model of gentry masculinity is applied. This kernel was developed by sociologist Connell, an Australian scholar, and who catalogued a list of masculinities throughout history. And the most relevant to analyze this novel was gentry masculinity, because the novel is set in the countryside, and the male character and narrator belongs to the landed gentry. And yes, there are sequences in the novel where he dominates the land with his gaze. So we have a male gaze on a landscape which is depicted as feminized and sexualized. So with hills and with caves, and yes, clearly here a model is King Solomon's Mines by Haggard. So yeah, that's basically my answer. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria, I don't know if you wanted to add something about
Not
that.
really. This is not exactly a field
Okay,
I
yes.
feel very familiar with, but
Yes.
probably Scott has other things to say, but I have questions later on for.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe I would leave the, there's another question by from Marina. Hi, Marina.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you to all the speakers for their wonderful presentations of their work. And it's, of course, an area that is really dear to me. And by the way, of course, you all mentioned Aaron Sibbe, whom I had the pleasure to meet. And because he teaches in a literature program, so of course he's very much focused on narrations and the stories we live by. And after all, the book is called Ecolinguistics: The Stories We Live By. So my question for you was rather a reflection on how, if you think, I mean, it's a question to all of you, if you think that an ecological analysis of language could shape, I mean, could push people to change, so could also help shaping narratives somehow. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for that question. In fact, I think I also wanted to ask Maria about that, about her project on tales and eco-sustainable stories. Maybe it's related to what Marina's been saying. Yeah.
Yes, this is of course a difficult, very deep question. I would say that awareness is a first step, and the other issue is that our language and also our other semiotic systems that accompany verbal language. So within the multimodal view of communication are entrenched within the anthropocentric point of view. And I would say that since they are systems that we created through evolution and culture, I would say that it is virtually inevitable. And we have to deal with that. And also, now that I deal with plant representation, I discovered, because I had never thought about it, that not only is it anthropocentric, but it is also zoocentric. So I would say that awareness about how we speak, write, and also the language and communication and multimodal communication we are exposed to is a first step. And I would say that it is an inevitable step. Then, of course, as Scott mentioned before in his presentation, in his talk, it is also very difficult to get out of the frame of the affluent society we live in, we actually don't see. It is transparent to us, and we just take it for granted as normal and natural. So my answer is not an answer to you. It is problematizing issues. Definitely, I profoundly believe that the first step is raising awareness. And then I know that our students say, okay, and now what can we do? How can we go from here onwards? What can we do? And the what can we do is a very, what can we do also with communication is a very difficult step, because we take for granted all the privileges we have. And maybe at this point, I would leave the floor to Scott for his own critical thinking about it.
Okay, great. Okay, go, Scott.
Thanks, Katherine. Sorry, I just wanted to jump on there very quickly to say that, I mean, this is, I think, Marina, it's a really important problematic to grapple with, you know, a system of problems. For me, the answer, you know, if it is an answer, would tend to be on the side of never letting your theory of language get disconnected from power and politics. And, you know, for me, I sort of go back to Gramsci. I go back to kind of discourse theory and thinking about the way that political imaginaries are constituted through acts of articulation, but that those acts of articulation are never going to be enough unless we can get enough of a social bloc behind them, right? And that social bloc needs to be thought of politically. It needs to be thought of as kind of an active process of getting people on our side, influencing, amassing power. And that's why it's so important from my perspective that we don't merely think about the problem of our current predicament as being a division between man and nature, but that we see the multiple ways in which it is human domination of other humans and colonialism and patriarchy, etc., that has got us into the situation we're in right now, and that we're not going to solve our relationship with nature without solving our relationships with each other and building coalitions and those social blocks.
Yes, and indeed, you know, what is interesting is also that the debate has shifted, and what strategies really work. You know, what are the, you know, persuasive strategies that may work or may not work? This is one of the issues that has been debated a lot. No, how do we communicate, and what are the strategies that work? You know, the apocalyptic visions, or, you know, all these fear are not really working. But anyway, I want to leave the floor to Cristina Caimotto. I'm so happy you're here. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, thanks for all the presentations. It was really interesting. I'm sorry I missed the beginning because I was also coming back home, but I think you're recording, so I'll be able to. Anyway, I have a general comment I'd like to share, and which is I had recent experience bringing the observations I'm doing with my research, ecolinguistics, and to other disciplines, and I really discovered I'm talking mainly about urban studies and sociology, and also climatologists. I had some you know, conversations with them, and they're really interested in what we're doing, and they don't know about it, and they don't think about it much. I mean, they know, of course, language is paramount, but when you start talking about metaphors, agency, lexical choices, etc., they they brighten up. And so I don't know if anyone, any of the speakers or anyone else had a similar experience, but I think this is one of the things we really need to do, is go beyond our discipline and just find ways of bringing this to other disciplines who really, really need our contribution.
Yes, absolutely. I will say something about this too, but Maria, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Maria Cristina, for saying so. My experience is that our students in modern languages degree have the same reaction. They know about metaphor, they know about tropes, or some of them at least, and then they discover how they can be used to critique or think about the world in which they live and the world that they represent through those words, and not only as mere tropes or as exercises. So I agree with you. There is this moment of realizing that maybe you can go beyond that transparent piece of glass of ideology and look at what is behind, or at least try. And thank you for mentioning that with other fields, but definitely also within our own field.
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't know if Arianna wants to say something about this, because she's been working and in fields that are not, you know.
Yes, I'm carrying out a project in partnership with an Italian environmental consultancy, and they were actually very interested in my project and in how we work on communication and use of English as a business lingua franca, let's say, and how it is being used for the intercultural communication, because they are really focused on transparent communication and in supporting Italian companies in their internationalizing process, but also in achieving results responsibly according to climate policies and so on and so forth. And obviously, they really believe in the connection between language studies, in this case, English language studies, and let's say hard sciences. So yes, I actually agree with you.
In fact, I'm really sorry that Cinzia Bevitori is not with us, because she was supposed to speak too, and she would have a lot to say about this. Yes, certainly I've noticed too that there is a lot of interest in different fields in getting the skill, not only data analysis, for instance, but also strategies of communication and so on. And actually, we've been working on policies, European the European Union's policies, and been looking at different frames and so on. And what I believe is interesting is also, for instance, grammatical metaphors, because adaptation, mitigation, resilience, they are indeed grammatical metaphors that serve a purpose, and that is to perhaps hide social actors, who is adapting, who has to adapt, who, and all this, resilience, for instance, as something that has replaced development, and how are we to respond, and so on and so forth. So transitivity analysis also I find fascinating in this respect, and so. Yes, so I think there's a lot to say and a lot to do with people working in other fields. And yeah, and I know that there are other scholars also working in this. Scott, did you want to add something? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to respond to Cristina in a way that kind of went back to something that Marina had said. I think it's also important that as discourse analysts and linguists that we that we learn from other disciplines. While we're being interdisciplinary, we have a lot to learn, I think, from other disciplines, and not just in terms of kind of the science of climate change or of ecology. When I was doing the research for my PhD, I found it quite frustrating that I could find so little critical work on environmentalism itself. So the ways that environmentalism sometimes is used, is captured by elite interests. And my inspiration for a lot of what I worked on was from critical political ecology. Now, political ecology is really working right there at where meaning making meets material, it meets like, at people's actual living conditions. And they wrestle with the kind of things that Marina was describing a lot, right? They, what is meaning, what is material, which is supervening on which, all the time. So they're always thinking about kind of, the symbolic and the material and their relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Critical geography in general. I know Daniela mentioned being inspired also by feminist cultural geography. I think geographers are doing a lot of this really good critical work, and I think we can learn a lot from them.
Yes. In fact, we're going to have also Andrew Baldwin at L'Orientale in December.
He's one of the inspirations for. Yeah.
Yes. Maria, did you want to add something?
I have a question for Arianna. Arianna, maybe you mentioned that, but I missed it. And if you could maybe expand a bit on how you selected the corporations you work on, and also if you could tell us more about non-profit discourse, corporation of non-profit, and if you deal with it, because sorry, but I missed that.
Thank you for your question. Well, it wasn't like very easy finding cooperation because, as I was saying before, environmental communication is not mandatory. So currently, mainly large corporations are dealing with it. And how I selected companies? Well, basically manually. I didn't consulted any database, so I just went through the ranking list of selected country and searching data. Well, I'm covering a time span period currently of 7 years, from 2015 to 2021. And as for the country, I selected companies operating both in developed and developing countries, and namely UK, US, Canada, Australia, but also South Africa, India, Sri Lanka, and so on. According, also thanks to my background as a student, mainly according to the Catcher's three concentric model of English. So my data are basically on English, and I forgot to add that I'm also looking at the Italian context in this case, and because of the cooperation with Carbon Sync, so together we established that probably it was interesting to see how Italy is dealing with decarbonization or with other climate strategies to become sustainable among the developed countries. And as for the non-profit organization, I was referring to the Global Reporting Index and the UN Global Impact, that are non-profit organization from the North, providing standards to organizations. So there is also maybe a new but still lively debate on the corporate social responsibility reporting, seen as considered as a neo-colonial practice. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Paola. Yes. Paola Catenaccio.
Sorry, exactly. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, Paola.
Thank you. That was well, that was a very, very interesting panel. So thank you very much. And if I may, Arianna, may I just also make a suggestion, maybe?
Sure.
So
sure.
Arianna, so I was thinking. Sorry, I was thinking your perspective is very interesting, but in the research I've been carrying out, I found that there's a lot of isomorphism. So actually, differences in terms of linguistic usage tend to decline when you've got this really strong institutional isomorphism, whereby discourse is developed in a way which people imitate other people, and that is a little bit of a problem, I think, when we are trying to see who's doing what in terms of linguistic choices. But still, nonetheless, I don't think it's anything that should be done. I think it's good that you're doing it. But I was wondering that maybe in my experience, the greatest differences are across different types of industries. So in fact, it's the sector which seems to be very much of a determinant of what you consider relevant in terms of your environmental policies or anything like that. So that is an interesting thing to see, to cut across where you are and what you're doing, and because it seems to be very much localized. I mean, it's a global problem, but then it seems to be very much localized, and there is where I think that also that call for multidisciplinary approaches comes in, because geographers, of course, they also work a lot on very localized things, and they do work a lot on narratives. So that is a very interesting perspective. So I just wanted to basically thank everybody for that contribution, which I think is extremely interesting. And I also found that historians, of course, are also extremely interesting in terms of what they do with the data that they deal with, because that's something that provides a lot of information. And in fact, also looking at the way in which historians describe evolutions in terms of their impact on the environment is hugely interesting. So yes, I think a lot of really great ideas are coming out of this seminar. So thank you. Just general comment, not the question, and a thank you to everybody, because it was really inspiring. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to add something, Arianna, but I think you answered. Yeah, you want to?
Yes, I was just to thank her, and I will definitely reflect on that. Maybe I have the chance to also to include in my corpus other sectors. Yes, so thank you.
Yes. And now we have a question from Maria Cristina Iezza.
Thank you.
Hi,
okay, can you hear me? Hi. Thank you, everyone, for your inspiring overview of some of the basic concepts in the field. So, I really appreciated many of the references that you provided, so that us and our students can go and check if they are interested in the topic. I'm sure that many of them that are here present today are. My comment was for my previous studies, for my interest, probably more linked to Arianna Del Gaudio's studies, because I also focusing on Professor Catenaccio's studies. I also analyze CSR reports in my PhD thesis and in other publications. So also my studies were focused on the comparison between developed and developing countries tendencies, and also on the development of the genre in the developing countries. So my focus was on the infancy of the genre, let's say, so especially in the developing countries. So that would be interesting to see. It will be interesting to see whether the model has changed somehow. One of the things has changed, for instance, I mean, not in the model, but in the availability, probably in of the CSR reports. Until some months ago, I think reports were available and collected by the GRI organization, while now you have to go and find them in the different websites, on the different websites. So that is something interesting. Like before, there was maybe a will, to kind of unify the efforts, while now maybe there can be more of a differentiation. And yes, as you were saying before, there are, of course, tendencies towards, a uniformity of them, based on the standards, but also in the different countries, based on the different cultures, the different ethics of the culture, that you will find definitely different topics that are highlighted. Yes, and of course there was an interesting advice that of focusing on several sectors. Just a question now. Since you're dealing with a company, and I mean for all of the colleagues who are also collaborating with with companies and organizations, whether you have had any any impressions on their interest in I'm sure they are, but if you are cooperating with their writings, so if they are interested in your advice as a linguist somehow. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And yes, I would probably focus on the CSR reporting in developing countries as a new genre, as an emerging genre in this country. But I'm also curious, as I was saying before, to look at convergences and divergences also according to genres, different genres, as I'm looking also at, for instance, at web pages. And from some preliminary findings, I am noticing that while in CSR reports, while in environmental reports, we have more like technical information. In web pages, as they easily reach the general audience, we have more the use of more persuasive strategies, the use of ambitious terms, and also metaphors. And what I was seeing is that climate change, they have a different approach when talking about climate change and sustainability. As on one hand, they have more, they like convey the topic of militarization, while on the other hand, sustainability is represented as a target, so is as something to reach. So we have the metaphor of journey. And I don't remember what you asked.
Whether you are working with them in writing the reports, or at least some of the parts.
Well, actually, carbon sinking, at least this is my case, do not write reports with companies, but they actually support them in defining their climate, their winning climate strategy. So, but their ideology, carbon sink identity, they are focused, and so they try so they in their ideology there is the transparent communication, the responsible achievement of sustainable and climate strategies, but they are not they do not support companies, Italian companies, in writing their reports.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if there are other questions from the floor. That we have perhaps dealt with a lot. Different things are coming out. Also, I think another common layer was that indeed of thinking about vulnerable countries, so-called vulnerable countries, and for instance, the depoliticization of, for instance, new policies, climate change discourse, environmental discourse. I think, yes, there's a lot of what Scott was saying about the depoliticization or of these discourses and conservation. Also, activism has been touched on. What activism means. Indigenous peoples. I've studied Stop Adani campaign in Australia, and the role of Indigenous peoples there was pivotal, I think. But anyway, we've put a lot on the plate, and it would be really great to continue. I think we all want to know more about each other's research. I mean, and also all the people who have participated. There are, a lot of great scholars also have connected, and so thank you so much to everybody. And yes, I think we may wrap it up, but yeah, thank you so much everybody for participating, and to our speakers, thank you so much for sharing your research, and so your fantastic insights. Francesca.
Can I take the floor? Yeah, thank you, Katherine. Thank you. And this was much beyond expectations. I'm not an expert, and I learned so much. I've been taking notes all the time. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank again our speakers and the leaders, Katherine Russo, Arianna Del Gaudio, Maria Bortoluzzi, Scott Burnett, and Daniela Francesca Virdis. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to invite you to the next seminar, which will be held on the 7th of December and will be devoted to translation, particular othering translation. And we'll see Maria Cristina Iezza in conversation with Mirella Gorni, Mauro Bubnic, David Catan, and Adrian Probst. And that's all for me. If you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to me at my email address, and I'll be happy to answer. And I'll see you at the next seminar, and have a lovely evening. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Francesca. Thank you, everybody.
Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.